So I'm going to go ahead and get started now. My name is Chandler Precht. I am the Associate Director of the Sustainability Programs here at Columbia. I'm also the Capstone Workshop Coordinator, and I happen to be one of the advisors this semester. So welcome to the 2022 Capstone Final Briefings. For those of you who aren't in Capstone and don't know what it is, I did want to provide an overview. So the Integrative Capstone Workshop for the MS in Sustainability Management and Science serves as the culminating educational experience for students in these programs. Students must draw on their problem-solving skills, practical and analytical knowledge that they have gained in order to address crucial sustainability issues for real-world clients. Each team has 10 minutes to present, and it'll be followed by 5 minutes of Q&A. If you're in the audience and you have a question, please wait for a mic to be handed to you before you ask your question. So now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Eric Hetty. The client is North American Sustainable Refrigeration Council, and their advisor is Susanne DesRoches. Welcome.
So hi everyone, my name is Eriketti, and today I'm going to be presenting on behalf of our Capstone team. So this semester we worked on determining the most impactful and cost-effective solution to achieving zero HFC emissions from supermarket refrigeration. A big thank you to my team, our faculty advisor, and our client for all of their hard work this semester, these past few months. So before I dive into project specifics, let me first explain the landscape of refrigerants. So supermarkets currently, the most commonly used refrigerant by supermarkets is hydrofluorocarbons. I'll be referring to them as HFCs from now on. So these are synthetic compounds used in refrigeration, but they're also used in air conditioning, aerosols, building insulation, and fire extinguishing systems. So the most commonly used refrigerants in the supermarket sector right now have a global warming potential of anywhere from 1,400 to 4,000. GWP, which is how I'll be referring to global warming potential from now on, is a multiple of how much heat is absorbed into the atmosphere by a particular gas in comparison to carbon dioxide. So one of the most commonly used HFCs in commercial refrigeration right now is R404A. This HFC has a GWP of almost 4,000. So to contextualize this number, one tank of R404A emits as much CO2 into the atmosphere as the fuel used by 14 cars for an entire year. So we have a solution to this problem, and it's natural refrigerants. These are natural compounds capable of refrigeration. They include carbon dioxide, ammonia, and propane, and they have GWPs of less than 5. However, only 2% of supermarkets in the US today actually adopt this solution. There are 39,991 supermarkets in the country. The refrigerant leaks from their systems emit 31 million metric tons of CO2 every year. That's 0.6% of total US emissions in 2020. So there are several key policies that have been implemented to address this problem, HFC emissions, that they have been adopted on a global level, federal level, and state level. However, for our project, we have focused on state level policies because our client focuses on decreasing HFC emissions from commercial refrigeration through state level policy. So while we conducted extensive research into different states, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what was effective and successful, we particularly focused on the most progressive ones in terms of HFC legislation, which include California, Washington, and Delaware. And we use this policy precedent in order to inform the policies that we ran through our model. So some examples of that. So we used the refrigerant management program from California. We used different funding mechanisms to support supermarkets because they have to incur a very high cost to change from an HFC refrigeration system to one that uses natural refrigerants. So this is what I'll be referring to as the replacement cost. We also use GWP thresholds, which are used in Washington and also California. So I've mentioned that our client focuses on state level policy, but who is our client? This semester, we worked with the North American Sustainable Refrigeration Council. They're an advocacy organization that works to decrease emissions from HFCs in commercial refrigeration, and they do that by advocating for legislative and regulatory policies. They work to connect their member-based network with natural refrigerant resources, including funding opportunities, workshops, conferences, and helping them navigate the regulatory environment and keeping up to date with regulatory information. So this semester, our goal was to create a flexible tool to assist our client in advocating for state action in order to reduce refrigerant emissions. We did this in 3 ways. One, we identified the most effective policy solutions to reduce emissions from commercial refrigeration. That was done through the research that I mentioned in the key policy slide. Then we modeled the emissions reductions potential of the policies that we selected with a 25-year horizon. And 3, we built a cost-benefit analysis in order to determine the per supermarket cost of the policies that we considered. We did this because we wanted to be realistic with our recommendations of the policies that we selected by factoring in resource constraints. So I've been talking about this tool. So basically, this is a tool that contains 2 models. They're connected through different assumptions. However, they have different purposes. Our emissions reductions model serves to quantify the emissions reductions potential of the policies that we have selected. We have done this by using inputs such as supermarket breakdowns by state, refrigerant systems in those supermarkets, what's their replacement rate. We looked at the GWP of refrigerants that they're using, their charge, leak rate. And for the cost benefit analysis, this model is going to help us quantify the cost of the policies that we're considering. So we looked at we conducted a CBA both for supermarkets and for states. So for supermarkets, some of the inputs include system replacement costs. So these are the costs that I mentioned earlier to change your equipment in order to have a refrigeration system that can use natural refrigerants. And the administrative program fees refer to the administrative program that we're considering, which is modeled after the refrigerant management program from California. So this is going to help states to create the inventories that they currently don't have. In terms of, so the administrative program fees include any compliance costs or fees that we need to charge supermarkets in order to fund this program. In terms of refrigerant savings, this is a benefit for supermarkets. So if you change your system from an HFC refrigeration system to a natural refrigeration system, you're still going to leak some of your refrigerant. However, replenishment costs are lower because natural refrigerants are cheaper. In terms of, for the state, we looked at different costs associated with incentive mechanisms. So we looked at upfront cost subsidies and also rebates in order to help supermarkets bear that replacement cost. And then any costs that a state will have to bear to run the administrative program. And in terms of benefits, we looked at the social cost of carbon dioxide. So here you can see from left to right a sort of simplified version of our model, or how a user would be able to use it. So our client would select a state to be modeled. We also have the option of using US totals numbers so that our client can model these policies on a federal level. And then they would select a policy and retrieve outputs and calculations. So first we model the status quo, then we model the first option, which is an immediate phase down. So under this option, all new systems installed in and after 2023 would have to use refrigerants with a GWP of lower than 150. Then our delayed phase down option would mean that existing systems starting in 2038 would have to use refrigerants with a GWP of less than 1400. And then we also consider the combination of these phase downs. We use New York in order to illustrate the results and outputs of our emissions model. So on the x-axis of this graph, you can see the years. On the y-axis, we have the million metric tons of CO2 equivalent, and then you can see the decrease in annual emissions through this this policy. I forgot to mention this is the combination of both of the phase downs. So it's our most aggressive option, and it's the one that we're recommending to the client as well. So you can see that the delta is very big. So it's almost more than 32 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent by 2048 on a cumulative basis compared to the status quo. So in terms of our cost benefit analysis, some of our key findings are that the social cost of CO2 leads to a net positive cost benefit for states. In terms of the cost of inaction, it's really high. So for example, for a medium-sized supermarket with a 15-year system lifetime assumption, the cost would be more than $1 million. Supermarkets have negative CBA results, and that's because of the system replacement costs that I've been mentioning. This is the biggest barrier to this transition. Finally, we have discussed the inventories issue. So most states, actually all states apart from California, currently don't have detailed inventories. However, through our CBA, we've determined that they can build these inventories at a relatively low cost. So through the findings of our model, we've determined, we've come to the conclusion that there are some steps that we would recommend to states, or our client can recommend to states. So In terms of emissions reduction potential, the combination of the delayed and immediate phase downs is the most effective policy. So this is the combination of the 150 GWP cap starting in 2023, and then the 1400 GWP cap for remaining existing systems starting in 2038. However, if a state is looking to adopt the lowest cost option for supermarkets, because our most aggressive policy option has high replacement costs, and states are going to either have to subsidize these costs or expect supermarkets to bear the entirety of this cost. And therefore, it's the most high cost option that we have. So if a state wants to adopt the lowest cost option for supermarkets, they would adopt the delayed phase down. In terms of the administrative program, which is what will help states build their inventories, we believe that this is vital under any scenario. So basically, if a state doesn't want to adopt any GWP cap policies, we believe that it's important they adopt the administrative program to build the inventories in order to be able to understand which policies are going to be most effective for their profile of supermarkets, and in order to implement in order to monitor the implementation as well. In terms of incentives, we believe that states that it's going to be really important to look at the replacement costs when sizing incentives. We think the upfront cost incentives are more important and more useful than rebates for equity reasons, because we want to support smaller supermarkets which face higher costs of capital. And finally, to conclude, our main takeaway from our CBA is that when including social costs, the cost for any policy is actually negligible compared to the benefit of emissions reductions. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Hi, great job. I guess I was just curious, did you consider the end of life emissions associated with disposal of refrigerants?
Yeah, we particularly looked at, so there's some specific characteristics that we had to consider in terms of leak rates. So the average leak rate, well, it depends on system size, but basically the average leak rate is about 25%. However, because of the disposal, there's an extra 20% of leakage that we consider when we calculate total emissions for a particular store. So we factored that in, and the way we did it was basically we averaged it out over the lifetime in order to also account for that extra leakage from the end of life disposal of those systems.
What is the natural version or the natural refrigerant?
Like what?
What is it?
So it's So it's a natural compound. Some of the examples are CO2, ammonia, and propane. So in most of our classes in this program, we've looked at CO2 as like a problem. For this case, HFCs are such high emitters that CO2 is actually the best solution that we have. It has a GWP of 1. So they generally, in order to classify as a natural refrigerant, it has to have a GWP less than 5. Some of the most, we looked at supermarket refrigeration. So CO2 seems to be one of the most high potential ones. However, ammonia has been very popular and is already implemented more than CO2 in supermarkets in cold storage, like large scale refrigeration and distribution centers and things like that. However, that was out of our scope because our client focuses on commercial refrigeration. So yeah, there's different natural refrigerants. Some have penetrated some markets more than others. In terms of our specific market of supermarkets, CO2 is the most popular one, let me say, and the most easy to adopt. So that we focused on that, and we've used it as a case study in our model as well.
So how about the power consumptions of the compared with the previous ones?
Yeah, I think I maybe I should have been more clear. Unfortunately, we weren't able to, it was out of the scope of our project. So our client wanted us to look specifically at emissions from refrigerants used and not from the systems. We tried to factor in our analysis any potential energy savings. However, that really depends on the system. So if you adopt, for example, CO2, there might be an energy saving, but if you do ammonia, there might not be. And also it's not even absolute in terms of if you do CO2, two different systems, one might have energy savings and one might not. So we didn't include any energy savings in our analysis. And also California doesn't either in their analysis, and the EPA reports don't either, because there's not enough data to make a conclusive to have a conclusive percentage to include as an assumption. So we steered clear of that also after discussing it with our clients. Thanks.